This is the Utah desert, and it's just empty. Normally, nobody would bring anyone out to a place like this, but for years they deliberately transported hundreds of beavers here, into a spot where they're not supposed to survive. In the US, people dug up old photos of the area and realized it used to be different. There was water here, rivers running full, and life was totally possible. Bringing it back with human hands would cost a fortune. Then this guy, no idea who he is, came up with a way to revive the place almost for free. That's why there are beavers in the desert now. But how are they supposed to fix it? Oh, it gets really interesting. Beavers are nature's engineers, sure, but nobody had ever thrown them a challenge like this, and their solution looks bizarre. A desert and a beaver are two things that shouldn't even appear in the same sentence. So what the hell is going on? To answer that question, we first need to figure out where Utah's water went in the first place. Take the drying Great Salt Lake as an example. Researchers estimate that the lake's inflow has dropped by 39% since 1850, simply because people have been diverting that water the whole time. And that's just one body of water. There's no shortage of culprits here: developers, cities, farmers, and so on. In short, Utah has almost no untouched natural water systems left. Rivers have severely degraded, their channels and floodplains are being reshaped more and more to fit human needs. And we often forget one simple thing. A river or stream isn't just water moving downhill, it's a living system which slowly builds its channel, slope, and banks, balancing the flow of water and sediment from the entire watershed. In other words, it does a ton of important work. Under normal conditions, a river spills onto its floodplain about once every 18 to 24 months. And the floodplain is part of the river too. It holds water, filters it, and helps regulate volume. Ponds and wetlands form there, plants take hold, animals move in. That's where biodiversity and all the other benefits come from. But once people interfere, the river turns into a straight, fast canal. The water shoots through, doesn't soak into the soil, doesn't build a floodplain, doesn't kickstart plant growth, and doesn't attract life. Just a flow of water, like a high-speed highway. That's it. The problem isn't limited to Utah. We'll get back to beavers soon, but first it's important to get the big picture straight. In this one state alone, more than 99% of the major rivers, including the Colorado and the Green, have already been altered from their natural state. And zooming out across the entire West, roughly half of all river systems have been damaged by human activity. That's about 140,000 miles of rivers in total. That's enough to wrap around the Earth almost 6 times. Snow is a whole story of its own in Utah. It's basically the state's signature. In winter, the snowpack works like a giant natural water bank. It melts gradually, replenishing streams and rivers, watering farmland and topping up reservoirs. The problem is that the snowpack is shrinking. Since 1979, when Utah started monitoring it in a consistent way using snow-tell stations, the peak snowpack has fallen by about 16%. Less snow equals less water in the rivers and creeks. After that, everything starts drying up. As water levels drop, ecosystems unravel, fish and wild animals take a hit, and biodiversity is threatened. Another factor making things worse is the constant wildfires. We'll get to beavers soon. Take the Milford Flat Fire, for example. It was the largest wildfire in Utah's history. It started from a simple lightning strike on Friday, July 6, 2007, around 4 p.m. near the town of Milford. Then the fire went completely out of control and ended up burning almost 363,000 acres. Then comes the less obvious but equally harsh part. After a fire, the soil loses its ability to retain water. So every rain that follows just washes tons of sediment straight into riverbeds. Banks collapse and new erosion gullies carve into the land. In the end, many rivers literally shrank several times over. What used to be a wide river valley with shallows and little islands turned into narrow trenches. The water tears through nonstop, never soaking in, never recharging the ground, never feeding the riverside meadows and clearings. Bottom line, people couldn't just sit back and do nothing. The answer, unexpectedly, came from another state. In 2018, Idaho was hit by the Sharps Fire, which burned about 64,000 acres. Meadows and trees in the Sawtooth National Forest went up in flames. The fire lasted more than 12 days, and it took over 400 firefighters to bring it under control. When the flames finally died out, people noticed something weird. Right in the middle of the scorch zone, there was a lush green pocket, bright, alive. dotted with flowers, while everything around it was ash gray. Want to know why? Water doesn't burn. And who's in charge of water? Beavers. All that greenery turned out to be a perfectly ordinary beaver wetland. The scene inspired scientists to test whether this was a one-off or something bigger. They looked at major wildfires after 2000 across 5 U.S. states, digging into satellite images. They searched for beaver dams and ponds near burn areas, and they found them. What's more, they found that on average, vegetation near beaver dams burned 3 times less often than vegetation in places without dams, which makes sense because green, well-watered plants are much harder to ignite than dry, brittle ones. Beavers soak entire valleys with water so thoroughly that fire just doesn't have much to work with there. And these natural lifeboats don't only help beavers. Researchers say beaver refuges can help amphibians, reptiles, birds, and small mammals survive fires too. Basically anyone who knows about the trick. So if beavers can really pull off little miracles, why not try bringing that beaver magic somewhere else? And the beavers really did the impossible. If you look down into the dizzying depth of the canyon at the foot of those barren sandstone mountains, you suddenly spot a true oasis. Everything is green, lush, and alive. The Price River winds quietly between the cliffs, even on the hottest summer days. And if you climb down and wait a bit, you can even see the beavers themselves, the architects who created this blooming, marshy landscape right in the middle of the desert. For Emma Doden at Utah State University, who studies relocated beavers, it hasn't been an easy job. Restoring Utah's beaver population? That honestly sounds like a terrible idea. Beavers in the desert? But that's exactly what she set out to do. Along with a few other researchers, their goal is to bring beavers back to arid lands, including areas that have burned in recent fires. Doden's main mission is to bring the water back to increase it and improve its quality in eastern Utah. Because these waterways are the thing that supports the region's wildlife, riverside vegetation, and rare threatened fish species. By the way, beavers weren't brought here at random, they were deliberately reintroduced. They used to live here before. At one point, beavers were found almost everywhere, from Scotland to Spain, from Syria to Russia, from Canada to Mexico. Right, beavers as far as the eye can see. But then the fur trade exploded, and between the 16th and 19th centuries, beavers were hunted to near extinction. It's only in the last few decades, thanks to better science and hard pressure from wildlife advocates, that their numbers have started rising again. One estimate puts the global population at around 10 million beavers today. That sounds like a lot, but it's still nothing compared to the past, when North America alone had something like 100 million. In this river system, beavers technically never disappeared, but their population was badly reduced back in the days of the North American fur trade. As Emma Doden puts it, the system could clearly handle far more beavers, so the idea was to strengthen it by relocating animals from elsewhere. And on top of that, in the early 2010s, a landslide hit the area. It tore down part of the mountainside and essentially wiped out the local beavers, the very ones that had been keeping this place thriving. So they decided to bring beavers in. But relocating beavers into the desert turned out to be one heck of a challenge. For Emma Doden, the biggest problem was obvious from the start: water. Last year's drought was so brutal that one of her study sites dried up completely. And then there's the heat. In summer, temperatures can sit above 100 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks, sometimes even months. That's why they tried not to move the animals during the hottest parts of the year. In these desert systems, beavers behave a bit differently. During the day, they stay in their burrows, hiding from the heat, and only come out at night. Totally get them. Doden works with 2 rivers in Utah, the Price and the San Rafael. Both run through some of the driest parts of the state's east, and her approach is extremely careful. She focuses on what's called passive river restoration, meaning she doesn't go in and reshape the landscape by hand. Many of the beavers came from a university rehabilitation and relocation center. Animals are brought there from all over the state, including those trapped as nuisance beavers. Before release, each beaver goes through a 3-day quarantine to avoid introducing disease. Then they're fitted with a microchip and a radio transmitter so researchers can track where they go and what they do. The end goal is obvious: get the beavers to build dams. Those dams increase habitat complexity and help bring water back into the system. The first trial took place in May 2019 and the second in 2020. In total, 47 beavers were relocated, all from so-called conflict situations. So basically, these were the beavers that were causing trouble elsewhere. You probably already know that in many areas, beavers are treated as pests. They undermine roads, cause flooding, and as a result, they're often trapped and euthanized. But here, those same animals are being used for something beneficial. Of course, not every newly relocated beaver made it. Some couldn't handle the heat, some didn't survive the stress of the move, and some were simply killed by predators. We'll come back to that later, just hold on to that thought. On top of that, a lot of beavers simply left the target restoration zone. Not everyone stayed put, and not all of them started building dams. But nobody was expecting a 100% success rate. Still, the team noticed something important. The team started seeing dams show up in spots where there hadn't been any beavers before. Some animals stayed right where they were released, but the ones that left sometimes moved as far as 12 miles downstream. For a small, awkward little animal, that's a huge distance. Have you ever seen how beavers walk? I wouldn't make it 2 miles. And even when they wander, they're still likely helping the ecosystem because the river was already badly degraded. Life in the desert is tough on relocated beavers, to say the least. With scarce resources and unevenly spread vegetation, it's no surprise they end up traveling long distances. The following season, Doden released even more beavers, making sure the newcomers wouldn't harm the small local population. The idea was simple: add more of these neighbors and restoration should move faster and cover a larger area. Yes, survival was a bit under 40% compared to around 80% for local beavers, but honestly, that 40% represents beavers that weren't shot as pests. That alone's already something. So what about predators? 4 of the relocated beavers were killed by predators. Most likely it was bobcats, cougars, or black bears. 1 was definitely taken by a coyote, the other 3 died for unclear reasons. On top of that, some beavers simply lost their tracking tags when they snagged on vegetation. In general, moving around is dangerous business for a beaver, especially if it's been dropped into a completely new place. They're very peaceful, gentle animals, and in the wild, that honestly isn't always an advantage. So for predators, beavers are basically walking sausages, easy, tasty, and nutritious prey. Beavers usually weigh between 20 and 50 pounds, and on land, they're slow and awkward. They waddle along like a scuba diver and flippers who, for some reason, decided to climb out onto the edge of the pool. It's obvious nobody wants to watch animals die. That's why researchers are always looking for ways to improve beavers' odds of surviving after a relocation. For instance, there's evidence that beavers settle in more readily when they're moved not as a single animal but as an entire family. So whenever possible, teams try to trap and transport whole family groups rather than lone individuals. At the same time, the team is studying beaver behavior. The idea is simple: to figure out whether some animals have traits that best predict survival. Are some of the relocated beavers bolder, more willing to take risks? And do those traits help in a new system, or do they backfire? But how do you even measure boldness in a rodent? It's not like you can ask leading questions. Actually, they use 2 tests. In the first, researchers rate the animal's aggression level after each interaction. The second is called the novel object test. On the 3rd night of quarantine, they place an unfamiliar item in the enclosure and time how long it takes the beaver to approach and start investigating it. In the wild, an object like that could easily be a threat. Why did they decide to release beavers and not some other animal? It's simple. Beavers are the ones that truly reshape the landscape around them. Have you ever heard of nature being transformed by, iguanas? Yeah, me neither. Beavers are famous for building dams on rivers, and a dam instantly sets off a chain reaction. Wetlands appear, like ponds, marshy ground, slow-moving water, and then the whole ecosystem starts functioning differently. Water quality improves, fish have an easier time surviving, shallow ponds store carbon, the landscape becomes more resistant to wildfires, and suddenly there are tons of new habitats for other animals. That's why beavers are called a keystone species. These are animals that so much of the surrounding ecosystem depends on. No wonder scientists are now rushing to bring beavers back to degraded ecosystems and dry landscapes. Their construction method's pretty simple, but extremely effective. First, they divert part of a stream to reduce the pressure of the flow. Then they drive branches and logs into the mud to create a base. After that, they build the dam higher using whatever they can get their paws on: sticks, bark from deciduous trees, rocks, silt, grass, leaves, clumps of plants. And yes, beavers calmly haul materials that weigh as much as they do. What's most surprising is that even harsh desert conditions don't stop them. They just need branches, or sometimes even rocks. Seriously, watch a rodent roll around something that doesn't even look like building material. But the beaver knows best. After all, it's the pro here. And the benefits of these wetland systems are enormous. They reduce flood risk downstream, increase biodiversity, clean the water, trapping sediment and helping break down pollutants like pesticides. Dams also reduce erosion and lower water turbidity, which is critical for many aquatic organisms. Now let's look at this step by step. First, water stops rushing straight downstream and begins spreading out to the sides. The ground along the river becomes moist, and in places where nothing grew before, in drought-stricken Utah, tiny shoots start to appear. Slowly, not overnight, but life comes back. Then insects move in, drawn by the greenery and the wetland conditions. For many of them, still water is the perfect breeding ground, including mosquitoes. Yes, the same ones that bite us nonstop. But they won't feel like the kings of the place for long. Almost immediately, predators show up, animals for whom mosquitoes are food. Frogs, some lizards, and other small creatures. For them, these wetlands are basically a wellness resort. Plenty of food, and the conditions are right. And then the bigger players enter the system. Birds, the ones that feed on insects and amphibians. For them, wetlands become a permanent all-you-can-eat restaurant. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner in one spot, no need to fly anywhere. If you can convince beavers to stay put, the impact can be huge. Even a single beaver dam improves water quality and at the same time acts like a natural fire break for the entire surrounding area. And right now, that matters more than ever. In recent years, North America has been battling wildfires, and the fires have been gaining ground. In 2020, flames swept across the western U.S., including Utah, burning roughly 9 million acres. And according to forecasts, it may only get worse. That's why some scientists seriously believe beavers could be part of the solution, helping restore rivers and the landscapes around them so they stop going up in flames. Areas with beaver dams have been shown to withstand wildfires noticeably better than places without beavers. Let's hop over to the neighboring state, Nevada. It's deserts all around there too, but they started bringing beavers back a little earlier, and you can really tell. If you stop near the stream, you'll see the barren landscape suddenly turn into an oasis. Susie Creek spreads out into a broad pond with cattails and other greenery all around. All day long, muskrats dart up and down the creek, ducks and geese paddle by, herons, mergansers, blackbirds, and cranes show up. The beaver wetland looks so starkly different it almost feels unreal. Everywhere else is the classic Great Basin scene. A high desert plateau, dry sagebrush, and grazing cattle. And then right here, there's life. The restoration of Susie Creek and of Maggie Creek in the neighboring watershed actually started back in the early 1990s. To be fair, the beavers weren't doing it alone. First, people put up fencing to keep livestock out of the streamside areas. That gave plants a chance to bounce back. The channel began holding sediment, a floodplain started taking shape. By 1996, the first willows had taken root, and by 2003, the beavers returned, basically as a side effect of all that restoration work. In Utah, a lot less time has passed so far, so the results aren't nearly as dramatic, but we just need a little patience. Wait a bit and hope the beavers survive, settle in, and do what they do best. In Utah, in addition to relocating beavers, people will also be building artificial dams. Well, to help the beavers out, why should they be the only ones doing all the work? Here's what it looks like. A crew of workers in hard hats and rubber boots walks upstream along the bank. Every so often, they stop, check the water level, and stick bright orange flags into the ground. Basically, they're copying the work of the wild beavers that used to be common here. Each flag marks the spot where a new dam will go. The problem is that many tributaries of the Green and Colorado rivers are now short on usable wood. Human activity has changed these channels so much that beavers simply don't have enough material to build with. So researchers came up with a simple fix. Pre-install dam-like structures to increase the chances that relocated beavers will survive and stay put. Of course, they got all the necessary permits and started adding these structures to the landscape. They act like bait, so the beavers don't have to start from scratch and instead just build onto and reinforce what's already there. And it's not just Utah. Beavers are in high demand in places like Northern California along the Klamath River, where the Yurok tribe is actively working to restore the river. Biologist Sarah Beasley builds beaver-style dam structures to bring beavers back. Though getting the river back into beaver-friendly shape has been a long process, so you see these projects not only in Utah and California, but elsewhere too. For example, in Montana. The artificial dams are assembled from natural materials, mostly gathered on site. First, workers drive a row of untreated wooden posts into the stream bed, spaced about 12 inches apart. Then they weave thin, flexible branches, usually cut from nearby willows, between the posts to form a porous barrier. After that, it's classic beaver engineering. The crew packs mud, sand, soil, roots, and plants on both sides of the structure, sealing gaps and strengthening the dam. On the downstream side, they add crisscross sticks set perpendicular to the flow. The water stops running in one smooth channel and starts splitting into lots of messy little paths, just like it would with a real beaver dam. And that's when I thought these beavers were taken from other places because they were causing problems for people. Won't they start doing the same thing in Utah? Criminal behavior? First of all, they're being released pretty far from towns and neighborhoods. These are restoration sites on rivers in remote areas. This is a specially designated protected area in the San Rafael region in south-central Utah. Second, it's possible to learn to coexist with beavers. You just have to plan ahead and take preventative steps. In some places, people install water level control devices in ponds. In others, they fence off trees for protection. Because if you simply remove one beaver colony, another one often moves in, and the problem starts all over again. But the key point is something else. Researchers have developed models that help identify sites across the state where beavers are most likely to take hold. They're working with the Division of Wildlife Resources to find suitable locations and to cover relocation costs. And those sites in Utah are considered the best options. That's where beavers can help the ecosystem the most while causing minimal harm to people. And here's the surprise. Beavers can also help salmon populations recover. Just not in Utah. Thanks to beavers and their dams, surface flow has already increased in tributaries of the Klamath River near West Fork Creek, where young salmon grow. It's simple. More water means better odds of survival for the fry. And for the Yurok tribe, salmon is the foundation of life, food, income, and a central part of culture and tradition. This year, because of drought and water shortages in the Upper Klamath Basin, millions of young fish died. Essentially, the tribe was left without a reliable food source for an entire year. To put the scale in perspective, in 2021, about 70% of all measured juvenile salmon in the river died. Now the river's recovering. There are more fish again, and everyone's happy. You owe me a like. See you later.